Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about something we've all been through. How to learn something huge without just giving up. Let's figure out how to climb that mountain of information together without feeling totally overwhelmed. You know that feeling, right? You open a giant textbook or sign up for some massive online course, and you just stare at it thinking, where do I even start? That feeling, it can be paralyzing. So much so that you just close the book and walk away. So what's going on here? Well, we call this the overwhelming learning challenge. It's that moment of dread when you're facing this giant block of information and your brain just kind of shuts down. But what if I told you the problem isn't you, and it isn't even the size of the task? Look, if you feel stuck, I want you to hear this loud and clear. It is not because you're lazy or because you don't have enough willpower. It's because the strategy you're using is basically fighting against the way your brain is actually wired to learn.
To really get this, we need to look under the hood a little bit. There's a surprising biological reason you can't just power through for hours on end. And no, it has nothing to do with your phone or social media. The truth is way more fundamental than that.
15 to 20 minutes. That's it. That's the magic number. Just let that sink in for a second. Our brains are just hardwired for this. After about 15 to 20 minutes of really intense focus, they get tired. They need a reset. This isn't some modern weakness, it's a simple biological fact. Trying to study for hours straight is like trying to sprint a marathon. It's just not going to work. So, what's the solution? The big insight here is that we have to work with our brain's natural rhythm, not fight against it. This isn't about forcing yourself to focus, it's about respecting how focus actually works. And that brings us to our very first strategy, divide and conquer. And it is beautifully simple. First, you look at the whole thing, the entire book, the whole course. You acknowledge the mountain. Then you break it down into tiny manageable pieces, little study chunks that'll take you about 15 minutes each. And then you just focus on one. That's it. Forget the rest of it. Your only job is to handle this one tiny piece. Okay, so now you have your task broken down into all these little chunks. The next decision is absolutely critical. Which one do you start with? This brings us to strategy number 2, which is all about building up that motivation, that psychological fuel. And it turns out what most of us have been told to do is completely wrong. You've probably heard this a million times, right? Eat the frog. Tackle the hardest, most awful part first. But that can be a total motivation killer. The smart way, the brain-friendly way, is to flip that advice completely on its head. Start with the absolute easiest part. And this isn't just a random idea. It's rooted in some fascinating work from a Stanford researcher named B.J. Fogg. He basically found that for us to do anything, we need a mix of motivation and ability. If something's really, really hard, you need a ton of motivation. But if something is easy, well, that changes the entire game. This right here is the key. When a task is super easy, you barely need any motivation to get it done. So by starting with the simplest little piece of your project, you pretty much guarantee that you'll get started and you'll get that first easy win on the board. So why does that first little win feel so good? Well, it's all thanks to something called a dopamine boost. You can think of dopamine as your brain's natural reward chemical. It's little, hey, good job signal. Every time you complete a task, it doesn't matter how small, your brain releases a little bit of it. It feels great and it makes you want to do it again. This is the secret engine that drives progress. Each one of those 15-minute chunks you finish gives you a little reward. That reward builds motivation, it creates momentum, and suddenly you're ready and willing to take on the next, maybe slightly harder piece of the puzzle. You're literally building motivation one tiny win at a time. All right, so we've talked about the biology of focus and the psychology of motivation. Now let's put it all together into a simple but really powerful playbook that you can use to learn, well, anything. Okay, here it is, your new 3-step playbook. First, take any big task and respect your brain by dividing it into those 15 to 20-minute chunks. Second, hack your own motivation. Always start with the dead simple, easiest one first to get that initial win. And third, ride that wave of momentum from your small successes to build your way up to the more difficult parts. So now, instead of seeing an impossible mountain, you see a path of small, manageable steps. You actually have the playbook to work with your brain, not against it. So the only real question left is, what huge, exciting, and maybe once overwhelming thing you gonna master next?